Thank you very much. It is great to be here with you on the second day of the conference. Mr. Secretary, great to be with you as well. The Secretary came out, Secretary Chu, to Colorado while I was governor on several occasions, and I thoroughly enjoyed forming a relationship with him. It was something to walk around the National Renewable Energy Laboratory with the Secretary of Energy. He's also a Nobel scientist, and he would talk to the scientists who were working on a variety of projects. And there are people from NREL here, they may remember this. And it was a little bit like the movie, The Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Remember that part where they're trying to get over the bridge and they have to answer questions, and if you answer the question wrong, you go kind of off into space. He would talk to the scientists, and then he would ask them a question that, that only a Nobel laureate might actually know the answer to. And they looked at him like, what's going to happen to me now if I don't know the answer to this? So I just enjoyed that a lot. I was watching the Secretary on the break, and it's really great. People rush in to see you. They visit with you, and then they want their picture taken with you. And I'm thinking, so here's the deal. Hopefully you'll be Energy Secretary of America for a very long time. But once it's over, I just got to tell you, it's over. And then you're the guy who's holding the camera, right? I've had this happen to me in Aspen a bunch of times where I'm sitting there, having a beer with somebody. Lance Armstrong was the last one, and we're having a beer, and a woman comes up and she says to Lance Armstrong, she goes, God, I just love you. Can I have my picture taken with you? And she handed me the camera. And then she says, hey, I'd really like another one to make sure it came out well. So he started laughing by now about this whole thing, and he says, the former governor of Colorado just took your picture. She took the camera back to me and says, thanks, and walked away. So, Mr. Secretary, fame is fleeting, and I just am here today in part to say thank you for the leadership that you provided to the United States Department of Energy, the help that you provided all of us, and certainly we overlapped for 2 years. My time as governor, the end of my term, your time as Secretary of Energy, and they were a very good 2 years in terms of our ability, our efforts to move energy policy and clean energy policy in the state of Colorado. So I'm not a scientist, and I'm not actually part of the solar industry. Well, what's he doing here? My role right now, I think today, is just to talk about how important the policy aspects of advancing a clean energy industry, including advancing this industry, the solar industry, how important it is to think about the relationship between public policy and the advancement of clean energy. And this was something that I understood coming in, campaigning for governor, developed a more serious understanding as governor. I've taken my efforts now to Colorado State University, and what I and the team that I work with, Ron Binns, who's going to be on the next panel, the former chair of the Public Utilities Commission in Colorado, Tom Plant, who was the governor's energy office director the entire time I was governor, Maury Doby, who did economic development work in northern Colorado. What we do is work with state and local governments around the country, with legislators, with governors, with utility commissioners, and trying to help them think about the public policy aspects of a clean energy agenda, how to advance that, and really try and convince them, as we learned in Colorado, that you could look to domestic energy and say that's got to be a bigger part of our portfolio, that you could resolve environmental challenges by looking at clean energy, that you'd actually see economic development as a part of it, and finally, that you could do it with equity in mind, that you could protect ratepayers if you thought about this policy agenda with those value principles operating. So energy, environment, economic development, and equity, 4 E's. A mnemonic device to sort of help us think about how you construct an energy policy, and not just state by state, but how we could as a nation. So I want to talk a little bit about solar specifically, but I wanted to let you know that as governor, that's how we thought about it, and I think the proof was in the pudding over time. I signed 57 different energy bills that were somehow what we consider advancing this clean energy agenda, and we constantly thought about it in terms of those 4 E's. We had a 10% renewable energy standard when I became governor. We went to 20% in the first 100 days. We went to a 30% renewable energy standard in the last year in office. 30% renewable energy standard. We did that from 20 to 30 without changing the rate cap and without changing the time frame. And we did it with the support of the utility that was most impacted, Xcel, the investor-owned utility in Colorado that has about 65% of the customers in this state, 65% of the power load, and they supported a 30% renewable energy standard by 2020 with a 2% rate cap. Because over time we had learned in sort of this incremental fashion that a renewable energy standard was something that the utility could meet, that there was an appetite for it from the people of Colorado, and that as the price curve came down, we heard Dick Swanson make this wonderful presentation just now. I know that I know you've been here for a day and a half, and I feel like the guy that comes in and they say, everything's been said about solar that can be said. It's just not been said by everyone. So I'm going to probably repeat a little bit about what's been said over the last day and a half, but the price curves coming down as dramatically as they have very much helped us sort of make the argument that you could do this with these 2020 dates in mind, and you could do it with these serious rate caps in place and still get to this 30% expansion for the investor-owned utilities. So that's just one place, the renewable energy standard, where we saw our ability, our capability to sort of move in this direction. Now what does that do when you sign 57 different pieces of legislation? Well, it helped us as a state think about how we could seriously develop a manufacturing industry here. Quite frankly, we already had a significant research and development industry. I don't know if the secretary remembers it or not, but when he was sort of first secretary, I was presenting the National Governors Association. I said in Colorado we had the best research corridor in the world because we have the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, CSU, where I am, Colorado University, the Colorado School of Mines. We have great private research that's happening here. And of course, he's a research scientist, comes from, Lawrence Livermore, and I said we had the best court in the world, and he said, I haven't been in Washington, D.C. a long time, but I know well enough not to, publicly disagree with you. So it's great as a governor, right, to brag about your state. And we really think that research and development is at the heart of that. We had that already. So for us to be able to build on it by demonstrating this sort of public policy embrace, this isn't about the solar industry. Quite frankly, we were able to attract Vestas, the world's largest turbine manufacturer. We were able to attract them here, not because we put any cash on the barrelhead, but because of public policy that we were willing to say demonstrates our commitment to the clean energy world. So for solar specifically, we knew the renewable energy standard was important. We did a solar carve-out. We did some definitions around distributed generation, and we knew that was helpful, but we thought there's a variety of other things. And the crazy sort of policy debate we have in this world is, we have to be opposed to mandates. We, in a regulated industry, being opposed to mandates is like a parent being opposed to putting their adolescent child to bed. You have to tell a teenager to go to bed or they don't go to bed. I'm not calling utilities teenagers, but I am saying that they are used to, as a regulated industry, they are used to being told by government what to do. It's not a free market. And so we did a variety of things that were in the world of mandates and regulation, but we did a lot of things that actually were not. That just said, at least to the building industry, you don't have to build every new home with solar in the sixth sunniest state in the world, but you know what? You have to offer the option to your customer, to the home buyer. Offer them the option up front. We looked as well at sort of the middle income, the lower middle income folks, and said, problem with these upfront costs, it's so difficult for them to find ways to finance this, and particularly at the time, right? This is 2008, when the break-even point may be 12 years or 10 years. It's kind of difficult for them to find a way to really do this, and so we said, let's look to California as an example, third-party leasing. And we signed legislation, I signed legislation, made it possible to bring in third-party companies so we could have lease systems on top of roofs. Last year in Colorado, 65 to 70% of all rooftop installations on the PV side in Colorado were lease systems. Imagine if we hadn't done that. Imagine if we hadn't done that. We did another thing, solar gardens. I had the opportunity a year ago to be up in Rifle, Colorado. Those of you who know, Garfield County is a serious county for fossil fuel extraction. We tried to help Garfield in a variety of ways on the natural gas side. We tried to help that industry. We did some fuel switching legislation that was really important. But here's Garfield County with really, at the time, they think the world's, at least the United States' largest community solar garden. Maybe garden's a bad name, but community solar array, where other people could purchase panels. They couldn't do rooftop installation and have the benefit of the sun that's shown on those, and then have virtual net metering, where they're able to see their own electricity bills be reduced without a rooftop installation, but installed in their community. And those are just sort of a few of the things. Out of the 57 things we did, some had their impact on solar, some on wind, some on the industry generally, but it was really important for us to think of all the ways that we could inspire this through public policy. So on the economic development end, this is this really important point, and particularly important for you in this audience if you're talking to decision makers, if you're talking to policymakers. So the state of Colorado, over that time period, became second in the country for the volume of solar workers overall, in every end of it, from the R&D part of it, the manufacturing part of it, the installation part of it. If you look at the whole sort of spectrum of activity, on the solar side, Colorado became second overall to California, a state that's 7 times the size of our population. We are first per capita in the nation. And that happened in large part because the industry looked to Colorado as a place where, because of public policy concerns, there were public policy advances, there was some level of market certainty. Now this, of course, is in a downturn, right? The worst recession since the Great Depression, and it's in an environment where at the national level, Congress is sort of, still not at a place where they've allowed the industry to feel national market certainty. So doing it state by state by state is certainly, we think, inferior to a national policy that would give investment certainty to the people out there, but it's better than nothing. And we've seen in Colorado, for the proof in the pudding, GE just announced that it's going to move its plant, or it's going to build a plant here in Colorado for cadmium telluride production, thin film production. Now, interestingly, the state we were competing with is GE's corporate headquarters home state, the state of New York. But they're coming to Colorado. And part of this is that we have created this ecosystem in this state that has to do with research and development, that has to do with finding ways to sort of move these nascent technologies into the mainstream, into the commercial mainstream, and then finding ways to provide a workforce in that mainstream. We were the first state in the country, actually, to go to our community college system and say, we want a green technology certificate, both on the wind and the solar side. So in a week from now, I'm going to make a commencement speech to a private college called Ecotech Institute, the first sort of 4-year technology institute located in Colorado, came here again to be part of the ecosystem, because that ecosystem has to include how we develop the right workforce for this burgeoning technology. So this is just the example, again, of a state that was thinking about it and trying to think about it every way we could. Everybody sort of knows that at the national level, we lack a cohesive national energy policy that Congress has endorsed. I think what you have is a Secretary of Energy and a Department of Energy that's trying to really understand how we think about energy in a long-term way, in 15 years, in 25 years, in 50 years. And we were just in a conversation with Ron Binns, former chair of the PUC, myself, Secretary, and he said to Mr. Binns, he said, you need to get utility commissioners to begin thinking about this in terms of what vision we have for the assets we're building. What do we want to be there in 40 or 50 years? Because those are 40 or 50-year investments, and those investments today, they're going to be around 40 or 50 years, should be the appropriate investment for that technology that we want in 2050 to give us the ability to have this transformed energy system. And I would say an energy system that looks at this issue around both environmental issues, climate change issues, and answers those environmental and climate change questions as much as it also modernizes the entire way we produce and consume energy. A lot of people have referred to Germany in various ways over the last couple of days, and certainly Dick made some references to Europe. But I just want to focus on Germany for a minute. Germany is a place where they have a pretty cohesive energy policy, particularly around renewables and certainly around solar. In May of 2012, 10% of Germany's energy, this is last month, May, 10% of Germany's energy was produced by solar PV. It's in May. Germany added 7.5 gigawatts of solar in 2010, 7.9 gigawatts of solar in 2011. In the U.S., we added 1.1 gigawatt in 2011. Germany's population is 1/4 the size of the United States. So if you look per capita, Germany in 2011 added 27 times the amount of solar per capita as the United States did. What's the impact on costs? People say, well, they have a feed-in tariff program. It's been very, very expensive. And actually, Chancellor Merkel has pushed back a little bit on the feed-in tariff program. But look at the costs there of installation. This is a National Renewable Energy Laboratory figure. They say for one-axis tracking solar systems, it's about $1.83 a watt, which is about 1/2 of the United States. That's the NREL figure. And I don't know how much that figure has changed since NREL published it, particularly with the price of panels coming down. But it was interesting to note that at the time, with this aggressive build-out of solar, we saw the price coming down. And that's actually been our experience in the United States in places where we've had this real significant extension of demand, largely driven, quite frankly, by renewable portfolio standards. So in the state of Colorado, we have a 30% renewable portfolio standard. When I become governor, the price of wind was about 9.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And yes, that included the 2.2 cents production tax credit. But the last big deal in Colorado that was approved by the Public Utilities Commission was 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour at 50% capacity between NextEra and Xcel. There's a Texas deal that was very similar. Now, not all deals in America are going to be that cheap where wind is concerned, and certainly it doesn't include the cost of providing intermittent power, but the fact of the matter is the price curve came down dramatically in wind. We saw the price in 1 year in America for solar panels, and some of it involves, a variety of things, including the importing of fairly cheap Chinese panels. That's the subject of debate, and now sort of an international case that's looking at the dumping of Chinese panels. But the fact of the matter is, with American panels and with Chinese panels, we've seen the price curve come down in a significant way. So we're looking at parity at 2020, 2022, according to a lot of different sources out there. And you saw this morning Dan Arvizu say we can get to 80% renewable penetration without a lot of assumptions. I had the good fortune of being able to look at that study and look at a draft of it and make comments about that study. I couldn't talk about it until today because they hadn't published it, but just understanding that it was out there and that it answers a variety of really important questions about what's the level you can really get to, even with very few assumptions and technological changes. What's the level you can get to in the United States of America for renewable penetration? What part can sun and wind play in that? And here's a very credible study that says, look at this. If you think about the price curves and if you understand where we're going, then we can get to an 80% penetration, and you can do that, again, without really doing it on the backs of ratepayers, and make this really significant difference with respect to how we as a nation produce and consume energy, make a really significant difference with respect to our carbon footprint, which per capita, right, is the largest in the world. We're not the biggest emitter of carbon anymore. China took that away from us a couple years ago. The fact of the matter is, if you look per capita, our carbon footprint, we as a nation need to lead this effort. As a governor, you travel all over the world. I'm sure you do as the Secretary of Energy as well. Time after time, in China, in Japan, Canada, in Germany, in Spain, in Oslo, in Norway, in Israel, all these different places where we had meetings that kept saying, the United States needs to take the lead on this. The United States has to be sort of the nation that makes a policy commitment. My friend Dan Riker at the Stanford University is famous for sort of talking about this triangle between technology, finance, and policy. There really is this nexus between the three, and it's important to have every part of that. So my sort of role, I think, this morning is to tell you that we can do technological development at the level we have. We certainly have, I think, had different and innovative ways to try and finance that technology. Sunshot, interestingly, is this great initiative because it looks at other parts of sort of the supply system and the supply chain and the permitting chain and all the other costs. Says, how can we bring those down? How can we do things so we are more like Germany in terms of reducing the cost per watt of getting it sort of installed? But the fact of the matter is, there are innovative ways to finance that. We tried to do some as a state, certainly third-party solar leasing, our PACE program, the variety of ways that people across the state are thinking of the green tech funds, but there has to be this policy embrace for this. We have to have policy makers in America understand the science and understand that if we look out, not if we do like a 2-year threat analysis and just say, what's going to happen in 2 years? If we look out 10 years, 25 years, and 50 years, what role this industry can play in transforming America into this clean energy society, but a society that actually made a dramatic difference for the rest of the world in terms of addressing global environmental issues. I think about this other really important triangle, which is this relationship between energy production, water, and food production. And I'm not going to make many remarks about this, but it's this other place where we have to understand that water is this sort of scarce resource in many places around the world. The arid West is one of those places. We see this playing out every day when we see water scarcity impacting food production, and as energy production goes up, oftentimes food production may decrease. We saw it in the drought in southern Texas. We see it here in eastern Colorado, where there are farmers who are competing for sort of the auctioning of water that may be surplus water from municipalities, competing with energy producers. So as we think about sort of clean energy, it's important to think beyond just the solar industry and think, well, we're solving this sort of policy, finance, and technology triangle, but there's this other important triangle that solar can play such an important role in, and that's solving this sort of global issue in this relationship between food production, energy production, and water. So for my part, I would just suggest to you that in order to be involved in policy discussions, it's really important to understand how important the political system is to this. And we're trying very much at the center to take the politics out of our discussions. We're working with Republican and Democratic governors alike, Republican and Democratic legislators alike, commissioners who are appointed by Republicans and Democrats. It's really important that this not be a party issue. But I would suggest to you that as American citizens who care very much about the future of this country and also care about this industry, that it's important to show up and to ask people who are decision makers, ask people who are in the policy world right now or people who want to jump in, candidates, ask them sort of what their vision is for 2020 or 2035 or 2050 for the United States of America, and what part clean energy plays in their vision. Do they have a sense of our real potential as the United States of America to transform our consuming of energy, but also really to make this impact globally? Do they have a notion about the role we play as innovators and creators of the technology, one of the most important export markets we have as a country? Do they have an understanding of our capability of actually capturing a significant part of the manufacturing sector where solar or wind, a variety of clean energy technologies are concerned? Do they have a sense about our potential for that? Because it's fine to have all of these other things in place, but we have to have decision makers in place who will, in fact, describe for you a vision that says in 2050, we can be at this place where we've transformed our energy sector in this really significant way, where we've looked at where the envelope was and we pushed the edge of the envelope for solar, for wind, for geothermal, that we've looked at the place that domestic or natural gas can play in sort of the integration and the firming and said, yes, we have this vision, and that vision is tied as well to answering environmental challenges. I really suggest that it's so important for all of us to just sort of understand policy is a real important part of this triangle, and without that, without decision makers who are in place to do that, then it's going to be more difficult to move this agenda. Not impossible, because the private market is such an important part of this conversation. Not impossible, but I think states around the country, and at various times at the national level, we have proved how policy can really advance an agenda in a serious way, and at the same time do the things that we started with. Provide us more domestic energy that's clean, that's affordable, that answers environmental challenges, that creates jobs for economic development, and that provides equity for the ratepayers of the world. So thank you very much for the ability to be here today. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and the Department of Energy for the Sunshot initiative, such an important initiative for us as a country, and for all of you involved in this industry. Our work certainly isn't done. Just keep in there and keep fighting. Thank you, and God bless you.